We as individuals need to change inwardly to manifest more love and oneness in our own sphere of influence, even as we are working on activism, changing laws, regulations, or raising awareness. And that many stones sending out ripples in the water, that's going to eventually create collective change.
Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. In this episode, I'll be talking to Pragati Pascale about the writings of Indian spiritual teacher Sri Chinmoy. Pragati has worked for the United Nations for many years as a senior communications strategist and consultant on sustainability issues. She is also the editor of a new book, Listen to Nature, Living in Harmony with the Earth, which presents some of Sri Chinmoy's teachings on nature and the environment. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Pragati, thank you so much for being on the podcast and for calling attention to this book, Listen to Nature, Living in Harmony with the Earth by Sri Chinmoy. I am wondering if you could perhaps tell us a bit about your life, your work, and in particular, how you've been committed to earth advocacy and creation care.
Thanks so much for having me, Forrest. My life and work have been mainly on two tracks. In my outer career, I started working for the United Nations around 1978 and started becoming more attuned to world issues, becoming a global citizen. Then for the last 30 years, I've worked at the UN mostly on communications and media outreach on different aspects of sustainable development, everything from climate change and desertification to indigenous issues. And for the last maybe 10 years, mostly renewable energy. Then the other track of my life, and the reason I actually applied to work at the UN in the beginning, is that I have studied meditation and spirituality for nearly 50 years with the Indian spiritual teacher Sri Chinmoy. He passed on in 2007, but we're trying to continue his work in the same spirit. And just last year, I was inspired to compile and publish this book of his writings on nature, Listen to Nature, Living in Harmony with the Earth, and it has a little foreword by Jane Goodall.
Mm-hmm. Well, sticking with this theme of your life, I'm wondering in terms of sustainable development and earth care, what were some of the really early influences that maybe set you on your vocational trajectory?
Well, I was very lucky as a child to grow up, even in the New York City area. My family was in the suburbs, but we had a modest housing development, but we were surrounded by acres and acres of woods. It was a wealthy person's estate that we were allowed to kind of roam on. It's a county park now. And I grew up spending hours and hours wandering and roaming, playing in the woods, and I'm sure it had a huge impact on me. That was where I found peace and joy and freedom in nature. And when I was about 20 years old, I was at university in Connecticut. My mother called me up and she said, I have a guru. I said, Mom, what are you doing? I thought maybe she was going through some kind of change of life. But she had been introduced to Sri Chinmoy by a friend of hers. And I had already started meditating every day, mostly for health reasons. I was very stressed out as a freshman in college. And I was also reading books about Eastern philosophy. And so actually, I was interested to know more. So she invited me to a meditation that Sri Chinmoy was having at New York University in a lecture hall. And I had a very powerful inner experience. And several months later, I also became a student of Sri Chinmoy's. And he had been invited in 1970 to offer twice weekly peace meditations at the United Nations. He was invited by U Thant, who was the Secretary General of the UN at the time and who was a Buddhist and a lifelong meditator himself. So then Sri Chinmoy encouraged his meditation students like me to see if we could get jobs at the UN, to be of service to the world, to have more people with a spiritual awareness working at the UN. So I applied to work there. I got a job, simple job, on a reference publication. And that was great for me at the time because I was trying to simplify my life coming from teaching high school. So in my UN work, I would say the biggest influence in terms of earthcare was in 1992 when I heard that the UN was going to be putting on a big environmental conference in Rio de Janeiro. And that was the big Earth Summit. And I was just starting a new phase of my career. And I said, I would really like to work on that. So I managed to get myself a transfer to that team. And I worked on communications and media outreach for the Earth Summit, which was really a world-changing event and definitely a life-changing event for me and many others. We had over 9,000 media representatives, journalists at the conference. We got just huge media coverage. For example, the cover of Newsweek had a picture of the Earth from space and these 4 big words, what is sustainable development, with a big question mark. And it was really the beginning of public awareness about sustainability issues. And yeah, I just want to add also that what I'm saying about the UN is just my own personal observations and experiences. I'm not speaking on behalf of the UN at all.
Well, given that you've been at this work for several decades, you probably have a better sense than most people of the long-term trajectory of how attitudes toward environmentalism and earthcare have developed and changed over the years. I'm wondering, what has your experience been of these shifts, and how would you describe where we're at today?
You know, that's a very good question. I mean, from my own perch at the UN, I've seen huge shifts over time, and also maybe some swings of the pendulum, some back and forth. I think we all can see that people have definitely become more aware, more conscious of environmental issues, both local and global, and the impact of our consumption and lifestyles on those. But then, you know, the swings have been very interesting. There's a passage in Listen to Nature where Sri Chinmoy talks about how humanity's progress is not in a straight line. So sometimes we can't always really see the progress that's being made. Sometimes it looks like we're going backwards, but it's more like a spiral, he said. So we're moving forward, but there's also this kind of shifting energy. And I really identify with that visualization. At the time of the Earth Summit in 92, I really felt there was a major opening in awareness and consciousness. And outwardly, that was the result of mobilization by thousands of environment groups who were working very hard. And then the media helped us out by covering the event, the negotiations, and educating the public about it. But inwardly, I think there was also some spiritual aspect to that, because many spiritual leaders were very engaged in the Earth Summit, both by educating their congregations and their constituencies, but also by praying. And I do believe in the power of prayer, of intention, of positive concentration. The head of the Earth Summit, Maurice Strong, he was a Canadian businessman, big mover and shaker in this area, the first head of the UN Environment Program. He and his wife were very interested in spirituality as well. And they met with Sri Chinmoy maybe a month or two before the Earth Summit. And they met with, I think, quite a few other spiritual leaders as well. And he told Sri Chinmoy, I was there, that he knew that there was a special spiritual energy behind this conference and that he was just trying to be an instrument. And I think a lot of people felt this on some level. Yes, it was a political event. There were negotiations, there were disagreements, there were controversies. But I've heard many people say that everyone who attended that summit, their lives were changed for the better. And way back then, it was already widely understood that climate change was going to have a huge impact. Greenpeace had a poster at the time, I saved it for many years, the Statue of Liberty with water rising up to her neck, and this big headline, "We are in deep, deep trouble." And that was 30 years ago, and we witnessed the signing of the very first climate treaty. So I thought, maybe I was a little naive. I thought there would be some major changes coming out of that conference. But then by some mysterious process, that opening sort of closed. And the UN process went on. The Rio outcomes where a commission was established and there was annual reviews and people reported on what they were doing. And yes, some things were happening, but it was nothing like what we thought would happen. And what was it? Was it entrenched interest, corporate money, government resistance, the forces of inertia? Probably all of the above. But people and governments in the developed world mostly went back to their comfortable lives and their other concerns. But the destructive forces that we had unleashed in the environment, the impacts of climate change especially, have become now so overwhelming and disastrous. The fires, the floods, the storms, that people can no longer ignore it. And it's impacting everyone. So everyone's concerned now. And COVID was another major disruptor that I think made people really rethink their lives and our relationship to nature. So I would say that now we have another transformational moment, another possible opening, when many people are seeing that maybe more fundamental change is needed, that we need to look more deeply at our own lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, given that situation, your read of the world today, you're now urging people to consider the teaching of this well-known Indian spiritual leader, Sri Chinmoy. Please tell us about this man and why you believe his messages are relevant for today.
Well, we are at this transformational moment when we're facing many interlinked crises. When you watch UN meetings like the big climate change conferences, you see government announcements, there's commitments being made, but it's never enough according to what science tells us. So it made me ask myself the question, what will it take to spur the kind of change that is needed, the kind of action? I think a lot of people are asking those same questions. And many people, especially young people, are sort of despairing that any major change big enough can happen in time. So I turned to my spiritual background for answers. And I felt that others might also be open to looking for spiritual answers to those questions. And since Sri Chinmoy had been offering peace meditations at the UN for many years, he was often asked by government delegates or staff about how spirituality could help with the environment or with the political world. And I thought it was an important time to bring that message forward. And we recently joined the Earth Day Festival in Union Square in New York City. We had a booth, and people were coming by looking at things. And when we were talking, when you say that to heal the environment, we need to change on a spiritual level, so many people say, yes, absolutely, it's true. So I think it's very relevant right now.
I do find that really interesting, that you can find some people who will argue for this change or that change or this culture shift or that culture shift. But I think there's something really intriguing and even new about this idea that if we're going to change our behaviors, if we're going to help to heal the world, we've got to change ourselves, right? It's a lot about inner transformation, attitudes, even spiritual conditions that's going to ultimately make the change sustainable. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And that's what Sri Chinmoy says. Yeah.
Well, you've edited this book, Listen to Nature, Living in Harmony with the Earth. Could you tell our readers a bit about the book and what they might expect from it when they read it?
Well, Listen to Nature offers the insights of a spiritual teacher into how people can live in harmony with nature and with each other, and what we need to do, what we need to change inside ourselves in our relationships with others as well. So there are a number of short poems, simple on one level, but very deep on another level, as well as answers to questions that Sri Chinmoy was asked over the years, especially at the UN. And there's also some meditations and visualization exercises involving nature, like on trees or the sunrise or the sky or flowers, to help us feel more at peace and oneness with nature.
Well, you clearly value the teachings of this Indian spiritual leader, and I have to say that your respect for Sri Chinmoy is deeply and quietly reflected in the way that you presented his words in this book. And honestly, I think that has a lot to do with what makes it such a beautiful read. So I'm really drawn by the signs of your artistic presence in the book. So I want to ask, what has been the story of your journey with this man? And more specifically, how has his wisdom personally impacted you?
I'm so glad that you're enjoying the book. The hallmark of Sri Chinmoy's writings is their simplicity and depth, their consciousness. And I tried hard to let that come through, to let the words speak, because they're very powerful words. And the design and the beautiful illustrations from nature from our design team are part of that experience of giving the words room to speak. The physical book is very beautiful, and there's something very compelling about it. I can't take credit for it. I really feel like some energy was behind this book. I studied directly with Sri Chinmoy for, over 30 years. And from the first time I saw him at that meditation at NYU, I just felt intuitively that he was a very high being, that he had that enlightened consciousness that I was looking for. What was most striking, he just radiated this peace and love. And no matter who he was with, and he met many people, political and religious leaders and athletes and musicians, and even just people in the street when he was out shopping or running, he just radiated this kind of love. He was seeing the divine in people, and that brings out the very best in people. We create so many problems for ourselves and for the world with our own minds and our wild emotions, our jealousies and insecurities and aggression. But all our problems have a way of clearing up when we can go beyond the mind and go into that deeper spiritual consciousness in the heart. And, I experienced that on a day-to-day level. I would come home from work, I'd be full of daily problems, and then maybe I'd go to group meditation with Sri Chinmoy, and we'd have real peaceful meditation. But then he'd also be telling these charming stories about how he ran in the middle of the night last night, who he met, and the songs he was writing, and just your problems would sort of clear up. And he also set such an inspiring example of how it really is possible to live a pure and illumined life, even in our crazy, mixed up urban world. When he came to New York in 1964 from India, he was taking the subway every day to work at the Indian consulate. He had a simple job there. But at the same time, he was meditating for many hours a day. And he set very high goals for himself in like every sphere of his activities. And it was so multifaceted. He was writing thousands of poems and composed over 16,000 devotional songs and painted over 100,000 paintings and drawings. And in sports, he was actually running marathons and ultra marathons, which is really unusual for a spiritual teacher, and lifting heavy weights. And it was quite a journey. And he himself, he also had a way of setting high goals for us, or of helping us to set high goals for ourselves, to see that we're capable of so much more than we think we are. So for me, in terms of stories, one of the biggest lessons he taught me was actually through an athletic challenge. When I was in my 20s, our team was entering a 24-hour bicycle race in Central Park around a 5-mile loop in the heart of New York City. And I used to cycle very recreationally, nothing much. But our team practiced for about a month before this event, which is also not much. But Sri Chinmoy assigned me to a team of the top 10 riders from our big group that was going to compete for prizes. I was the only woman on this team of 10. And he suggested that each of us could cycle 300 miles in 24 hours. I said, whoa, that's a lot of miles. And we had a time trial a few days later where I tried to keep that pace, and it was grueling, and I was a little depressed going into the race. But the night before the event, we had a meditation with him. And at the end, he sort of looked at me, this twinkle in his eye, like, you're in for a very special experience. You don't know it. And sure enough, when I got to the park the next day, when I saw the banner for the race across the road, I just got this thrill, like an electrical current up and down my spine. And I got on that bike and I just pretty much couldn't stop. It was an amazing experience. And I tried to make myself receptive to this kind of spiritual force that was driving me, pushing me. And I tried doing some chanting and meditating, praying. I was really only focused on doing that 300 miles. I wasn't watching any of the competition or whatever. And then they would stamp you every time you came around the lap. And at the end of 24 hours, I had 310 miles. And then a journalist from ABC Eyewitness News came over with a camera and she said, "Congratulations." I said, "For what?" And she said, "Oh, you won."
Oh, no.
I was the first woman. I had this wave of gratitude. Like, it was beyond my wildest expectations. But it was a huge lesson for me that we're just all capable of so much more than we think we are if we can tap into that spiritual strength inside us. You know, Sri Chinmoy became quite well known among athletes for promoting this approach to ultra running and cycling and swimming. But a lot of that same philosophy applies to diplomacy and environmental activism and service to the world. We are, each of us, capable of being instruments of this spiritual force. And we need to be instruments. And he met so many people in the fields of diplomacy and government and religion. Many of them told us how touched they were by those meetings. His message was like, never give up, keep offering, stay positive, see the divine in others. I mean, it sounds quite corny. What can you say? You know, truth sometimes sounds very corny. But Sri Chinmoy showed me that it was really only a kind of love that transforms people. And it's actually hard to live that truth. It takes a lot of spiritual focus. Jane Goodall said the same thing. I met her through the UN. She talks about how we cannot really change people by criticizing them or by challenging them, only by touching their hearts. And she's a serious activist.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that story that you told about the bike ride. And also, you're mentioning that he took the subway to work. I mean, oftentimes you think about gurus and spiritual teachers, you don't think about them in the midst of everyday life, right? Or maybe what we would call in our organization, earthy spirituality. It's like involved with the nitty-gritty of the everyday. And it's interesting that you use that subway image, because when I was reading the book, occasionally I would just sort of have this image pop into my head of sitting next to him on the subway, right? And just asking him questions, and he'd just give me these straightforward answers. We'd just be shooting the breeze. You did a good job of giving us a sense of his humanity, honestly, in the book. So I found that really refreshing and maybe surprising, just because we all have these stereotypes of what guru means and how they should present themselves, etc.
Yes, he was very human. He told so many amazing stories of going out shopping, taking the bus down to Jamaica Avenue and interacting, bargaining with the different shopkeepers. And he used to go training for marathons in the middle of the night. He didn't sleep very much. So he had amazing experiences running in New York City in the streets at night. They were always really incredible experiences.
Well, I think that's really an important point in itself, because the wisdom that we need is the wisdom for the everyday that makes a difference in our daily lives and in all the ways we try to maybe work for the health of the planet as well. I'll let you choose a passage from the book, Listen to Nature, maybe as an example of how Sri Chinmoy's teachings encourage us to act differently or be differently in a suffering world.
Sure. I'd like to read 3 paragraphs, short, that I think summarize what he's trying to say in that regard. Each individual has a special role to play in the protection of our small planet. It is the illumination of the individual mind and spirit that will precede the awakening of a new collective awareness. The change in individual attitudes will be the precursor of a change in institutional policies, and the result will be a greater respect and love for our planet Earth. Mankind will survive everything precisely because God will not allow his perfection manifestation on earth to be a failure. But it is very difficult to impress upon others the necessity of respecting and preserving our Mother Earth. Everybody has to be taught through inner persuasion and outer example. Because we human beings see enemies all around us, because we are afraid someone will come and attack us, we use our money and energy to make ourselves powerful. To make ourselves powerful enough to fight our enemies, we cut Mother Nature into pieces and take her resources. As long as there is fear on earth, Mother Nature will never be able to fulfill her divinity. It is only when we no longer see others as enemies that we shall be able to keep Mother Nature intact.
That's beautiful. What are the possible implications of that passage? What can readers take away from that?
I think that we as individuals need to change inwardly to manifest more love and oneness in our own sphere of influence, even as we are working on activism, changing laws, regulations, or raising awareness. And that many stones, sending out ripples in the water, that's going to eventually create collective change. But the level on which we need to change is very deep. Our identification and oneness with nature and with our fellow human beings. And I'm sure it sounds very trite, perhaps even wimpy, that some people will be thinking, my God, if we have to wait for everyone to be a more enlightened human being, we're never going to see change in time. But I do think that's what has to happen. And we're already seeing a growing transformation happening beyond the divisiveness that is so prevalent in the media. We're seeing that more people are open to a deeper kind of change. More people are meditating and trying to be more spiritual.
My sense of that dynamic has been that, especially among the young, like millennials and younger, that is more true, I think, than it is with the general population, is they have more of that openness to transformation, to looking at earth care and earth advocacy as more than action, as having everything to do with being changed as a people, to find that connection relationship to nature when we become better at relating, I guess you might want to say. Do you think that's true about the younger generations?
Yes, I do. I think many people from all generations are feeling that,
Sure.
But I think young people are very open spiritually and feel that something fundamental has to change.
Well, in a way, it kind of makes sense because there's more at stake for them. Their future is going to be grappling with all of the problems that are in process. Let me just tell you my response to the book. When I started reading it, I intended to read it several chapters at a time, but pretty soon I realized that this was not that kind of book. So I slowed down and began to read just a section at a time, almost like a daily meditation. And I found that really I needed time to dwell on the ideas I was reading. In fact, I was heartened to see that at several places in the book, you inserted brief meditation guides that invited readers into that slower, maybe more contemplative kind of engagement. So I'm curious, how do you hope readers will engage this book? And maybe what are your hopes for what they'll take away from the reading?
You're absolutely right. It's not a book presenting information to be absorbed by the mind. It's a book with reflections on our right relationship with nature and each other that has to be absorbed with the heart. So yes, the book invites you, encourages you to read it more slowly, almost contemplatively, and to try some of the meditations and visualizations. Each of those little poems, they're so simple, but sometimes each one can take you into a whole world of reflection. So it does take time, and I hope people will take the time to absorb these writings. They're, on one level, very simple, but they're very deep, very powerful. And we hope to use them as a way for us to change inwardly.
I wanted to learn more about Sri Chinmoy's life, and so I did some research and found something that he said in another publication that struck me as especially intriguing. And I wonder if you might comment on it. I'll give you the quote. He said, "True religion has a universal quality. It does not find fault with other religions. Forgiveness, compassion, tolerance, brotherhood, and the feeling of oneness are the signs of a true religion." What do you make of that?
I think Sri Chinmoy appreciated each religion, every religion, each spiritual path for its unique approach to the divine. He actually wrote books about other spiritual figures, poems and songs. He actually made an even stronger statement about the universality of religions that sort of bowls me over every time I read it, and we use it in a lot of our interfaith events. Spirituality is not merely tolerance. It is not even acceptance. It is the feeling of a universal oneness. In our spiritual life, we look upon the divine not only in terms of our own God, but in terms of everybody else's God. Spirituality is not hospitality to the other's faith in God. It is the absolute recognition of the other's faith in God as one's own. And that sets a very high bar for interfaith dialogue, but it's one we can aspire to. Sri Chinmoy was very active in the interfaith movement. We joined and organized quite a few interfaith events at the UN, and he attended the Parliament of the World's Religions a few times and was even invited once to open the Parliament with a silent meditation. And we're still active. We're going to be at the Parliament of the World's Religions this August in Chicago. I'm going to be co-presenting a workshop on Listen to Nature, a meditation workshop, and there'll be other activities that Sri Chinmoy students will be doing. What I've seen from these interfaith events is that faith-based groups have become a real force in building awareness and action about climate change especially, and all kinds of environmental issues. And these interfaith events have become important ways for different religions to collaborate and to strategize together. The UN Environment Program has its Faith for Earth initiative, which is trying to bring together religions in support of the UN environment initiatives. So I'm sure there are other activities like that. But I think there's strength in collaboration. If spiritual people of faith, can feel the universality of religion, maybe it will help us all to collaborate and to be a more powerful force for positive change.
I know that it's the nature of religion, of organized religion, to sort of draw boundaries, the in and the out, the true and the not true. I would imagine people hear that word universal and might even feel a bit threatened. They might have alarm bells going off because by someone seemingly dismissing what's unique and true about their religious beliefs, it might make them wary, it make them reticent to actually engage. But I'm wondering, what really was Sri Chinmoy saying about true religion? And what can readers who have very defined religious beliefs and standards and values, how can they engage this idea that he is talking about true religion?
He appreciated the divine in each religion and the truth in each religion. The concept of a true religion was not one that he really talked about much. Perhaps in that passage he did. But he valued so many religions and had many friends in the leadership of many major religions.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit tricky to understand and explain, but I definitely think a more nuanced view of his thoughts on this would lead us to think that he's not saying all religions are the same, right? But I like how you put it, that there's value in each one. And we need to look for what's beautiful in each set of beliefs, each system of religious faith and practice.
He used the metaphor that all religions are like different roads up the same mountain.
Huh, yeah.
They're all approaching the divine, each one in its own unique way. But we're all striving for the same goal, and we're striving for oneness with the same God, maybe called by different names.
Well, when we squarely and honestly face the realities of the climate crisis that we're in, honestly, as you know, it's hard to be hopeful. In fact, the metrics of the science of climate change suggest it might even be too late to make changes in our collective behavior that will actually make a difference in the long run, that severe consequences really are inevitable at this point. So, as I read this book, it became really clear that Sri Chinmoy posits hope not in circumstances alone, but also, maybe more importantly, in God. And I was struck by a passage on page 45 of the book, and there we read, "We must not underestimate the power of spirituality. Prayer and meditation mean new life. When we pray and meditate, at every second we are invoking God's compassion." How do you make sense of those words, and how might they actually help us to hold on to hope?
I also read the science, and I hear it all the time at the UN, of course. The reports from the IPCC are UN reports. The prognosis is very alarming, very challenging, and that sense of despair is growing. But it's actually the hopefulness of Sri Chinmoy's words that was one of the main motivations I had to publish the book. The words that you quoted, Sri Chinmoy said those in 1992, actually, in response to a question from Hannah Strong, the wife of Maurice Strong, the head of the Earth Summit. And she was asking, how could we still have hope when there's so much environmental destruction all around us? And I think he would say the same thing today, even though the destruction is so much greater. And in that same passage, that same question, he said that if we start treating nature with respect and caring for the natural world, that what has been damaged can be repaired. And there are many stories about the power of nature to heal and regenerate that would back that up. But you're right, for me, his most hopeful words are about God's role in the world. And this is my favorite. We are all God's creation. He will not allow his creation to be destroyed. Never, never. For years, we have been going through a very dark period. Sometimes we know that when the night is the thickest, then the bright dawn appears. Right now, the world situation is most deplorable. But this is not going to last for good. As a God seeker and God lover, I feel that very soon, and I'm not saying tomorrow or in a month or year or two, but in the near future, a new light will dawn and it will clear all the thick clouds that have gathered for years. So he's talking about integral peace, not just the absence of war, but the presence of harmony, love, and oneness. And I think that includes harmony with the natural world. I know it's very hard to believe that we'll ever have real peace in the world. But to me, it gives me a lot of hope that he saw that in our future. And another point, he said that with all the natural disasters that are happening, Mother Nature is trying to teach us a powerful lesson, like a mother, but she does not want to destroy us. So our rational minds may find it all hard to believe, but I have seen, and I do believe, that miraculous things happen all the time, things that defy rational predictions. People in situations are healed through the power of prayer and spirituality. When the Berlin Wall came down, it was a little unexpected at that time. Sri Chinmoy said it was because of the collective prayers of the German people. He had visited the wall shortly before that, and he had predicted that it would come down soon, but he said it came down even faster than he thought. It was just a small example of how collective prayer can make a real difference in intractable situations. So those very hopeful messages are a big part of what I was inspired to try to offer through this book, because the despair is growing, as you said, especially among young people, and it's not helpful. Despair disempowers us. At the same time, though, we're not saying that we're just going to sit back and pray and meditate. Sri Chinmoy also said that these positive outcomes require effort on our part, the effort to transform ourselves, to be more in our hearts and approach the world with love and oneness, and the effort to make positive changes happen in the world. He said every self-giving effort of every human being is needed to change the fate of this world. So hope is not a kind of passive wishful thinking. He said that inside hope, there's power. And when people read such hopeful and powerful words, I hope that they'll feel that there is some hope, after all, with our effort and God's grace, that we can indeed rise to this transformational moment to transform ourselves in the world.
We've been in conversation with Pragati Pascale about the new book, Listen to Nature, Living in Harmony with the Earth, featuring the teachings of Sri Chinmoy. For more information about things we talked about in the podcast, go to the show notes for this episode. I am Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon, and our producer is Dave Wolfers. Timothy Connor is our editor, and Forrest Reed is the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Colleen Meggerly, and Jesselyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.